Hi, welcome to the small shed. 2 years in, it's time to see how the shed's bearing up. See you in a minute. Now it's just over 2 years now that this has been up and built. There are a couple of minor issues that I know I've got to deal with, and there's just a bit of general maintenance that I could do with doing, just to keep it tidy, I suppose. So let's have a walk round. I'm going to start at the top, work my way right the way down, and hopefully cure any problems on the way down. Let's go and have a look on the roof. Now, there shouldn't really be a great deal of problem with the roof because it's plastic coated galvanized or treated metal, and it's really pretty much like the industrial units, so there's not a lot of maintenance. There's a few bits and pieces up there that have got trapped up in the eaves and the ridge. There's some, I don't know whether it's probably some of the foil off the insulation that I had to fish out, and the screw caps come undone occasionally, but other than that it was more or less wiped down and going straight for the guttering. One of the pieces of guttering had come loose, and I had to actually take the end cap off because it was so tight against the hopper head at the other end that it wouldn't undo. But a quick bit of wiggling and resorting out. I've probably got a slightly odd detail in that the guttering passes out beyond the fascia board that I put on, but we got it clipped on anyway, and as I say, a very quick wipe over. It's not really needed, but it's useful to have just to tidy it up. Then it was round to the other side, similar job, wipe down the roof and address some of the problems I'd had, which were to do with that gutter getting blocked up with moss that's come off our main roof. And then in that area there are two sides of roof. There's a little pop out with all the tools in, and if that gets blocked up and you get a heavy rainstorm, it's actually overflowed once and made a bit of a mess in there, so I wanted to try and clear that up so it wouldn't happen again. 99% of the time it's fine, but because I hadn't done anything to it, it was virtually full with moss and grime, so we got that out. But on the whole, not a great deal of problem with the roof. Quite happy with it. Seems to have held up well, and it's, of course, it's insulated as well, and with the inside panels being metal sprayed as well, it's finished on the inside as well. Once the gutters were cleaned out, I gave them a quick run round with some water with a hose just to finally tidy them up. Then it was onto the undergrowth. I've planted some shrubbery up the front of it just to try and take the hard lines off the shed, but unfortunately some of it's grown up under the eaves and is starting to push in, and if I'm not careful it'll just get bigger and bigger and push things off underneath the roof. So just gave that a quick trim. There was a honeysuckle there that wanted a bit of a cut, just to thin it out a bit, tidy it up. Got to try and get something to grow on the lower areas a bit more, but it is blending in the shed into the garden a bit more now. Just gave all the walls then a bit of a wipe down with the broom, get all the cobwebs and rubbish off so that you can see what you're doing. There are a couple of minor issues. The mastic seal around the windows between the cladding and the window framing in wood had come apart in one or two places. It just split slightly, so that needed a little bit of work doing with some silicone just to seal it back up. Again, it's not been a problem. It's a sort of second line of defence anyway, but it's best not let these things get too far out of line. So I just got a little squeeze of silicone and popped into the areas where it had pulled away from the frame. And similarly on the actual timber itself, one or two areas where it split very slightly and sap had come out of the wood, just gave that a little rub round and a seal back with some more of the cuprinol garden shades I'd used on the shed. It's doing well as a finish. I've got some cladding that I'd not thought about that I'd left out the back, and indeed the children's playhouse down at Weston done in the same stuff, and it's untreated and that's all cracked, whereas this has remained pretty good. So 2.5 years on, as a finish it's pretty good, but it did need that little bit of tidying up here and there. Now the biggest problem is this pop out. It was a late design change in the whole shed, and although I'm glad I did it, it's given me a couple of problems. Just got the wasp's nest out that was in there, or hornets or something, I don't know. But the door itself, which I'd made, had swollen a bit and had dropped a little bit, and I'd left a large gap at the top which I thought would be good for ventilation, but in fact really it could do with the gap at the bottom, because the rain was getting in again at the top through that gap at the top. It was a deliberate idea to have it there, but it's in the wrong place. So really the only thing to do with that, it was just not shutting at all, so it's got to come off, be lifted up and reset and planed down. So I just nipped it off. Again, the hinges, the banded hinges that I've got on, are a little bit slack as well. They tend to droop over time because they're just not very substantial, but fairly simple matter. Whip it off, put a couple of spacers underneath it and put it back on again in the higher level. That left me a gap at the bottom of about 3/4 of an inch, which will still get the ventilation in that way, but it will hopefully not get the rain in. Got the plane out to have a go at the door, so that's shaved a bit off, and it was fairly much all the way up to the lock almost that was binding. So I don't think it's entirely the fact that it had dropped, or it seemed to have just swollen, or maybe even the shed had moved slightly and just tightened it up. But there's quite a bit of work to do on that to get it back to the point where it would fit nicely. Just go to plain as sand and then quick repaint on completion. Before I did that, of course it meant that the lock was in the wrong place. Again, the weight of the door pulling down on it had already pulled it slightly out of line with its keyhole. So I just took it off altogether, refixed it so that it was back in line with the keyhole properly, and cut out a new mitre or new housing for the lock itself to go into. and again quick touch up of the paint where it got damaged. I think this will probably do for 5 years before it needs a repaint. Quite what I'll do when I get to round the shrubbery when I come to repaint I don't know, but the rest of it should be easy enough to do. But it has lasted well and I'm quite happy with that. So that's pretty much got the roof done, the walls done, gutters and everything were sorted. The only other real area then to worry about was the bottom. It sits on a 4x4 grid of timbers that have been wrapped in a heavy duty membrane that's like a plastic, so I just wanted to give that a quick rub round, wipe round with a brush and a bit of old rag just to make sure that there weren't any holes in that. Again, I don't think it'd be a problem, it's treated timber and it's wrapped in polythene, but it's just a matter of keeping it clean, tidy, and making sure there's nothing causing any problems. So there we are. On the whole, I'm quite happy with that. We've done pretty well 2 years in. It probably will need a coat of paint in the next couple of years maybe, but that's bearing up well. The weatherproofing generally has been good. I've had, I think, one incidence of water coming in around the window when that mastic seal failed the first time, and I patched that up. Other than that, it's been good as gold. If anything, the biggest criticism I've got at the moment is that with this sort of weather it's too hot in here. The insulation is brilliant, so that when it's 32 degrees outside, it's probably a lot less than that in here if it's been cool all night. But the minute you start putting machines on in here, you've got the equivalent of 2 kilowatts of heat coming into the shed, and that can be a real problem if you're using the planer thicknesser. I've had it up to about 35-36 degrees and it's not fun in here, and I can't open the door because of the noise it makes, but that's a minor issue. Probably air conditioning one day if we carry on getting summers like this. Other than that, it's bearing up well. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope it was informative or interesting anyway. Look forward to seeing you next week and we'll do something different. See you then. Bye.